Good afternoon, and welcome to Until Justice Just Is, hosted by YWCA Seattle King Snohomish. My name is Alexandra Liggins. I am a citizen of the Tlingit and Haida tribes of Alaska, the Cha'ak Kagwantan, or Eagle Wolf Clan. My Tlingit name is Anasik. I'm honored to serve as your MC today and a proud member of the People of Color Executive Council, also known as POCEC. This event, formerly known as Stand Against Racism, has been led by POCEC since 2011. What began as a small gathering has grown into a powerful regional event, bringing our community together around a shared commitment to equity and justice. Each year, we focus on a different facet of systemic racism. This year, we center housing justice, an issue that continues to shape the stability, health, and opportunity of our communities. Today is an opportunity to learn about policy, practice, and the role each of us can play in advancing safe, stable housing for all. Let's begin by grounding ourselves in a land acknowledgement. The YWCA stands on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, whose ancestors have lived here and cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. We honor the Coast Salish nations and the diverse Native communities who thrive here today. We are alive and strong. We strive to remedy injustice through our beliefs and actions, working to steward and uphold these historical and sacred spaces across the Pacific Northwest. It is now my pleasure to introduce Margaret Duno-Gritton, who is the Chief Public Policy Officer at the YWCA Seattle King County Snohomish. In this role, she leads efforts to advance policies and laws that promote fair housing, civil rights, economic opportunity, racial justice, and the health, safety, and empowerment of women. Margaret brings both deep expertise and a strong connection to this community. Raised in the greater Seattle area, she earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Washington School of Law. Her background in law and public policy informs a thoughtful, strategic approach to advancing equity and justice. She is also an active leader beyond her formal role. Margaret has served as advocacy chair for the Filipino Lawyers of Washington Board of Directors, as a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and as part of the policy leadership group for the Seattle Chamber of Commerce. Across these spaces, she brings a strong voice for equity, representation, and meaningful policy change. Please join me in welcoming Margaret Duno-Gritton. Gunshchish, and thank you.
Thank you for that warm introduction. I'm honored to introduce our panelists, each bringing a deep expertise and a commitment to advancing housing justice in our communities. First, we have Gregory Davis, who describes himself as an organizer in an urban planner's clothing. He has been a leader with the Black Homeownership Initiative since its inception and has worked to advance policies that expand access to homeownership. He is especially focused on addressing the barriers that cause hundreds of first-time Black home buyers each year in Washington to fall out of the process. Davis is also the co-founder and managing strategist of the Rainier Beach Action Coalition, which is a community-driven lab advancing innovative, place-based solutions for systems and policy change. Next, we have Allison Eisinger, Executive Director for Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness. Allison brings more than 30 years of experience across social work, public health, and community organizing. She has led efforts to advance practical, people-centered policy solutions and has played a key role in strengthening the coalition's impact as an independent nonprofit. Her work is grounded in a deep commitment to equity, systems change, and strengthening our communities. Finally, we are joined by Estela Ortega, Executive Director of El Centro de la Raza. For nearly 5 decades, Estela has been a driving force in building community and advancing equity across our region. Her leadership has helped shape transformative projects like Plaza Roberto Maestas expanding access to affordable housing while strengthening community connections. She is widely recognized for her lifelong commitment to justice and advocacy. Now, I'd be remiss to not mention that Colleen Echohawk was unable to join us today, and she sends her deepest regards. To open up the discussion, I want to ground us in progress and hope. What is currently working in housing justice, whether in policy, programs, or community-led solutions, and where are you seeing the real impact for single adults and families? We'll start with Mr. Davis and then work our way down.
Yeah, thank you. And let me state my appreciation for the invitation. Really impressed with the organizing of Color Executive Council is doing, so thank you for being here. And also to my esteemed co-panels. Yes, wonderful, inspired by your work. One of the things that you'll learn in terms of my work is that I believe I'm representing this other end of the continuum in terms of housing. I know we need to provide support for our houseless families, and we need to provide affordable housing for our people of color families. And I'm kind of on the other end of the continuum with home ownership and talking about the importance of home ownership on this continuum. So I refer to myself as a network weaver because I'm not necessarily a housing advocate, so to speak, or a developer of housing. And just weaving a impact network is one of the things that I want to call out that is working in the housing arena. It is one of the mechanisms needed to crack open this protracted housing industry, because we know that it was created and designed not for access. And so we've been looking for what's the antidote to it? What's the thing that's going to really move this particular area? And we determined it was an impact network. We wanted to be able to look at the supply side, who's building homes for homeowners. We wanted to look at the demand side, who are those first-time home buyers? And we also had an opportunity to look at the enabling the environment. And so one of the things that they get created from a policy position is the Washington Covenant Homeowners Act, and it allows for debt reduction, mortgage, pre-development opportunities for developers, mortgages for homeowners, and in this year it's been able to create 500 new first-time Black home buyers in the region. So that's how we're doing our work on this other end of the continuum here.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm also just going to take a moment to thank the YWCA and to recognize that not only are we here because of the work of the BIPOC Executive Committee, but also that this is an agency that has as its mission uplifting the power and voices of women and girls and directly confronting racism. And those are two essential elements if we are going to make progress in housing justice, because after all, the deep inequities that exist in our nation, in our political and economic and social systems, are tied to deep inequities around race, around gender, and of course around class. So I'm deeply grateful and really honored to have the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I work for the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness. Our mission is to mobilize our community to challenge the systemic causes of homelessness and to advocate for housing justice. We particularly focus on those people, families, individuals, young people on their own, who are unable, through a capitalist system, to have a safe, affordable, stable home. And it is in our collective interest to make sure that people have that safety and stability. It's fundamental to everything else that people need. The Coalition on Homelessness has been around for a long time, and I want to also just name that we do our work in true coalition with our member organizations, including El Centro La Raza, the YWCA, and many other organizations that provide housing, shelter, employment, and other kinds of behavioral services and social services in our community. So my work and my voice is really informed by the work that happens every day and every night. And it is worth noting, as we start with what is working, to say that our community collectively is providing stable, quality shelter and homes for thousands and thousands of people every day and every night. And there are about 10 to 15,000 people who cannot be accommodated in our existing systems. So that's, of course, where there is additional work to do. I think one of the things that works the best is relatively simple to state and complex to implement, and that is meeting people, whoever they are, wherever in their lives they are, with the right supports and housing that works for them. That's not to be simplistic about it, but it's to acknowledge that a young person, a person of color, a young person of color who may have lost their home because their family members were not pleased with their gender identity or expression, is probably not going to be particularly well served in an extremely rigid kind of shelter. We need to accommodate and adapt our services, including shelter and outreach and housing and employment, to meet people where they are and to support them on their journeys. That is, that's a complex undertaking, and it means that we don't have cookie cutter services. The best studied example, and I'll just share this briefly and perhaps we'll come back to it if there's time. The best studied example of responding to homelessness is what's called Housing First. And that is an intervention that essentially acknowledges that someone who has experienced serious challenges in their life, someone who has perhaps experienced chronic homelessness, living with a disability outside for multiple years or over and over again, that person needs a home that is not conditioned on them being perfect or healed or recovered. And that approach of Housing First is something that actually our community here in Seattle and King County has been a pioneer of. And we have now invested local, state, and federal dollars, as well as private dollars, in creating over 6,000 Housing First homes for people in our community. That is working extraordinarily well, and there are a lot of research studies that show it. Doesn't mean that people have been healed of all their wounds or that everything is perfect in their lives. What it means is that they're no longer struggling alone outside in our communities. It means that they have the supports that they need, and it means that they have the safety and stability of a home, which is necessary for any human being to thrive. So I will turn to Estella for the great work of her organization.
Thank you so much. Well, I also want to thank the YWCA for having us here and bringing this topic to light. And we know there's 300 or more people out there listening, and we hope that you will spread the message to others also in terms of what the points that we're going to be making today. And so when I think about affordable housing, I feel like I have to give an analysis of how is it that that developed, especially in communities of color. And so it goes back to, and I know that if there are city, or King County, or many nonprofits who know this group, and there's a group that out of New Orleans that was doing the Undoing Racism training, and it's called For Survival and Beyond. So that started many, many years back. I mean, you're talking probably a good 25 years when they came to Seattle to do this training for child development staff. And then it grew. It grew to city employees. It grew to King County employees. It grew to nonprofit organizations. Also taking this training, like, okay, where does racism come from? It was developed by human beings, and if it's developed by human beings, it can be undone. So there was an incredible consciousness that was raised around race, racism, and how do we bring development and equity into communities. And so out of that, obviously, when you have consciousness being raised, especially in entities who have the ability to, develop policy and so forth. And obviously, there's an interest in terms of, one, we all know, it's common knowledge, that there is not enough housing for people in our city. People are being pushed into the county, and we wonder why the freeways are full, because housing at one time was more affordable in South County, I'm sure in North County, but that is also changing because there is a shortage all the way around of affordable housing. So I just want to give you that background that, the things that happen, whether it's in city or county or state government, they don't happen in a vacuum. They happen because people organize and their consciousness is raised. So I want to talk about what is working now. In 2016, we built Plaza Maestas, a $45 million development, about 112 units of affordable housing, child development space, retail space, offices, and a community center. $45 million back in 2016 was a lot of money, and it's still a lot of money today. It took 7 years to pull that all together in terms of the pre-development, the money that has to be raised, the grants that have to be written to do that. And it happened by accident that we were going to be right across the street from a light rail station that was never intended for Beacon Hill. It was just going to go underground, but all of a sudden it's there. When it was going to pass us by, and there's a decision made, there's going to be a light rail station on Beacon Hill. And so here we are right across, we've got a vacant lot there, and so just the wheels began to move, if you will. And when I talk about what's working is that El Centro de la Raza has always had a commitment to multiracial unity. And the reason is that when we took over peacefully this abandoned school building, the only reason that we won that building was because of communities of color, the faith community, and the anti-war movement in 1972. Because at that time in the city of Seattle and King County, there was only about 25,000 Latinos in the region, and our power came from our allies. And so our commitment has always been to do whatever we can to promote multiracial unity through our programs, through sharing our culture with others, and so forth. So when it was built, it was like, it was a miracle. And so communities of color, the faith community, ethnic chambers came to us and asked, how did you do this? And I'm glad that people came to us and looked for that kind of advice, and I'm proud to say that today many of those communities are developing the much needed affordable housing. And so we shared what we knew, and we organized together for better policies. Like, for instance, the city of Seattle has a fund that helps people buy land. And we learned that if you don't own your own land, it's going to be hard to develop a property. Because the reality is that there are people who, the majority communities have been developing housing in other places for a long, long time. And when I would be in front of city council or in communities, I would say, we need to develop the capacity of organizations who work in communities of color to develop housing, because once again, We will be left behind if our communities aren't developed. And of course, people are doing, great work in communities of color around housing. That does not mean that the problem is solved. We all know that. There is still just a lot of work to do. But I guess, the point is that working together as communities of color with other allies also, we can make things happen. And I just leave you with that message. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think all three of you touched on a very powerful through line of solutions, which is that collective power building piece within community, of course, with the impact network, the nature of your work, Allison, with the coalition, and like you said, Estella, the way that you were able to create this plaza was through community organizing and that accountability and relationship piece. Very powerful and very inspiring. To switch gears a bit, let's talk about what's not working. So where are the biggest gaps between housing policy and lived experience? And Allison, you touched on this a little bit with the need to center what folks need and meet them where they're at, what those solutions look like. What are the challenges that single adults and families still face, particularly women and people of color?
Well, I will say one of the biggest disconnects, although it is perhaps not, it is not going to be news to the folks listening or participating in this event, is the extreme racial disproportionality in terms of who experiences homelessness and the extreme poverty that it represents in this country. In particular, Black Americans and Native American and Alaska Native people are extraordinarily overrepresented, more likely than others to experience homelessness. And that itself reflects the systemic causes that contribute to people not having that basic need met in our nation. We have had at least some consciousness and awareness about that disproportionality, and there are certainly organizations, including the Chief Seattle Club, that are specifically focused on responding to that disproportionality and welcoming their relatives and neighbors and family members to homes. But I would say that continues to be, both a reflection of the racism and I would say also other problems, sexism and classism in this country, but it's also a call to action. I think we know and we understand that we absolutely have communities that have been disinvested in, not just underinvested in many cases, and really also that that our support systems and affordable housing networks have also been underinvested and disinvested in. So it isn't terribly surprising when you understand some of those mechanisms to see the result. I would also say, we have a fundamental issue around housing, which is if you ask people the warm, fuzzy answer to what does home mean to you, you'll get all sorts of interesting and touching responses. We know because we've done that at the coalition sometimes at events. We've asked people to just fill in the blank, home is. So I invite the people who are listening today to just think about how you might fill that in for yourself. I suspect that no one is likely to be filling home is in with home is a profit center. Home is a way to generate profit. Home has become a commodified good. And that means that in a community like ours, where the area median income is huge, over $120,000 is the area median income here in King County. That means half the people in our county earn more than that and half earn less than that. So if you're at 80% of area median income, you're a family of 3, that's about $87,000 a year. Technically, you could qualify for subsidized home, but really we know that the vast majority of people who need homes and who need deep subsidies are people who are living on way less than that. Folks who are working in our community, folks who are living on their disability income, folks who are retirees, who are living on a fixed pension. That means that we have to work against housing as a commodity if we want to live in a community where we do not leave our elders, our family members with disabilities, our parents with kids out on the street. So I would say, in a nutshell, what's not working is letting the market or capitalism decide who gets to live here.
Thank you.
I'll pick up on that, if you don't mind. And thank you, Estella, for calling on the organizations on whose shoulders we stand. And so in the name of that, I want to give Ron Chisholm a shout out for his work with Beyond Survival. I'm thinking about the through line that has been raised here that is where a gap is. And it is in those families, those moms, those children who are seeking homes, be it shelter, be it affordable housing, or be it a home that they own, and who supports them through that journey, through that process. In the homeownership realm, our network of 125 partners are looking at what we call the fallout rate. You heard mention to that. Those who aspire to be homeowners. It's been 600 people a year have fallen out of the effort to pursue a home. Either it's through decline by lenders, or it's through incomplete paperwork on their behalf, or it may even be just withdrawals, and it's not continuing to pursue it for whatever reason. And so who is supporting them when they are, I think I'm back. So who is supporting them once they have fallen out? And what are the systems in place to support them once they have fallen out? There winds up being mental anguish. Maybe I should just switch. There winds up being mental anguish among them to the point where they don't want to pursue that as a goal for themselves as a result of that. Even if it is seeking shelter, if they're not supported in those ways, they don't pursue it again. Even if it's affordable housing and for whatever reason the system prevents them from being successful, they then withdraw. And the same for those who are pursuing homes for the first time. So we are, through this Impact Network, is trying to get these entities who are responsible for supporting these families out of their silos into a network so that the lender is conscientious about the needs of the buyer, so that the developer, home developers are conscientious about the needs of the buyers and vice versa. So the Impact Network is really looking to bring all of these parties together in a strategic way so that we can address those who do fall out. So some of the things that we've been able to do to counter that gap is having homeowner counseling networks or buyer readiness funds. We're also looking at the supply side because we think that pursuing building homes is probably a faster way to get folks housing. And we're talking about different types of housing. We're not talking about the traditional white picket fence full backyard. We're talking about townhomes. We're talking about co-ops. We're talking about condominiums that can be built pursuing on a shorter time frame with less resource. So we have what we created was a Field Order 15 program. For those who desire to build homes, they can get resources for pre-development, land acquisition funds. Through the network, we're also tracking the development of 1,600 housing units over the course of their development and time. So this is one of the things that, to tend to that challenge, that gap of the fallout rate, to tend to the psychological impact that the lack of success in pursuing housing is creating, is being addressed. YMCA families deserve homes. They deserve to build equity in their homes. So it's interesting, the point about commodifying home ownership. We do want to flip that to the point where these families can get into their own home, build equity, and in turn have generational wealth for themselves, just as the commodification seems to support so many other people who probably are just benefiting from it and don't need it as much as these vulnerable communities. So those are ways that we're trying to get at the gaps. But yeah, that fallout rate is one of the greatest ones, but then also the psychological support for our families who are trying to pursue these opportunities for themselves is an area that more support is needed.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, in terms of sort of the gaps and challenges, I'm going to speak about it from, the development of affordable housing at this point. And to me, it's not a complicated question. It's about money. It's about money. We need more money in our city government and our county government to develop housing, whether it's home ownership, whether it's affordable housing, which is, for the most part, apartment complexes, or whatever housing people want to build. I mean, I was just, as you were talking, Gregory, I was thinking about when I decided to buy a house. I wanted to buy a house, and that was in 1979. I had two children. And I made a decision that I wanted to buy a house because I wanted my children to have memories of where they grew up. And so I set about a plan, and I did it. It wasn't easy because my husband had bad credit, and and there was so much that you needed to have for the down payment. But it was doable if you worked at it. People don't have that choice right now in the city of Seattle, and it's getting tough out there in South County also, those choices. And people need to have those choices to be able to dream in that way. And now I live in South County. I still have my house in Seattle. My girls don't want it to be sold because that's where they grew up, and they want to have that for, down the road for their children or whatever. So concretely around affordable housing, the apartment buildings that El Centro is building. The gap there, I think, is that there's money, and I say that in quotes, there's some money to have the dollars to build the housing. And what makes a complex, an apartment complex, sort of feel like a community, that there are other things happening around it. There's a child development center. There's a community center where you can have after-school programs there. There's retail space. There's office space, like we have at Plaza Maestas. None of that money, you have to go out and figure out how you're going to raise that money. And that could be through, city government. That fund is not very big. That it needs to grow. It could be going to foundations, going to banks, and so forth. But it is becoming harder and harder to raise that kind of money because a lot of people are doing development that's necessary. But that becomes a challenge, and it's important to have the elements where people can develop a small business, where they can have a place for their kids to be able to be in that community center, because again, that's what builds community. And still, I'm just going to emphasize the bottom line: we need city government, we need King County government to allocate. I know we allocate a lot, but more is needed.
Thank you. Very direct. I like that. I think a lot of the answers touched on systemic and systems-based gaps. We talked about the commodification of housing, the need for our communities to tap into the equity, and of course, bottom line, more money, more money, more money to develop these solutions that we know exist and that are working. Transitioning to a conversation around accountability, what changes would help build the gap? between policy and practice? How can we strengthen accountability to ensure that housing policies actually deliver equitable outcomes? You can take that first stab at it.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So you introduced me as a organizer in urban planning's clothing. So here's where the organizer in me comes in when it comes to being able to bridge the gaps. And so we determined that bridging is probably not the terminology to use, because when you think about a bridge, it kind of takes you over the problem and the water just continues to run. We said we want to crosswalk it, right? And that's kind of an urban kind of a term, because in our neighborhood, we use crosswalk. So you have to traverse the street when the lights is running, the meter's running on the lights, cars there, pedestrians are coming across, and that allows you to get into the actual work of it, as opposed to going kind of over it, because the way it has happened before, going over it, that's left some people unaccountable. Right. So one of the things that we talk about is, yes, we did start at the state for a policy win, and we learned that when you start at the state, it winds up holding, in some respects, counties and municipalities accountable. So the county and the city. And so in Seattle, we're steeped in the review of the city's comprehensive plan. Ultimately, the comprehensive plan needs to level up to the State Growth Management Act. And it's the State Growth Management Act that the cities and the counties need their goals to be able to meet when it comes to home housing, when it comes to jobs. And so once we get the Covenant Home Act established at the state level, we do see now elected officials, department directors at the counties and at the city level following suit more. There's been more money placed in the city of Seattle's budget this year for home ownership than there has been in many, many, many years. And so that's one way that we see kind of crosswalking it will help create that a little bit more accountability that's needed in order for these vulnerable families to be able to have opportunities.
Allison, you want to go?
I think it's very interesting to frame this question in terms of accountability. One has to ask the question then, so who is accountable to whom? And I think we are interested in having a government that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and accountable to the people. So good governance is an essential piece of being able to see the policies in place that allow for us to shape a world in which, while we are one of the wealthiest states in an extraordinarily wealthy nation, we also see the effects of growing income inequality. So I'll just talk about two pieces. At the state legislature this year, State Representative Strom Peterson was able to pass a piece of legislation called, that was House Bill 2266. Those are always numbers that stick in your head longer than you think. And essentially, it was to hold local jurisdictions accountable to the State Growth Management Act, which calls for communities to plan to create enough homes for all their residents over the course of the coming decades. However, poor people were, and still are, being discriminated against in terms of what kinds of housing and what kinds of short-term stays, like shelters, were being approved in a variety of jurisdictions, not only here in King County, of course. So that House Bill 2266 is part of an accountability measure to ensure that, we hope, in doing the planning and the construction of additional homes, we are not saying there is a group of people who are not allowed to live in, I'm just going to say, Kenmore or Bellevue or Seattle or Federal Way. All those communities have had some form or another of this kind of delay and denial of approvals for shelter or transitional or emergency or permanent supportive housing to be built. So we hope that's a step towards accountability. But I would also say, you know, it's not like I'm a tax policy wonk, but it's really relevant to our conversation to acknowledge that here in Washington State, we have the second to most upside down tax structure of all 50 states. Florida is worse than we are. Okay, and next to us is Tennessee. What that means for those who, like me, kind of glaze over when we talk about tax policy is that folks who are at the lowest 20% of income earners in our community pay more than 11% of their income in taxes. And the richest 1% of people in our state pay a little over 7% of their income in taxes. Okay, that's not equitable, that's not good governance, and I would argue that that's not accountability, because we have mutual accountability in the form of a social contract to make sure that we don't leave people outside. There is, of course, no state income tax in Washington State, and we rely on revenue sources like property taxes and sales tax to fund a lot of what we need. Well, those are two tax sources that, again, tend to hit people on lower incomes much harder than people who have higher incomes. So I think accountability and good governance go along with making our tax code, the ways that we bring revenue in for government to do its work and send money out for government to do its work, more fair. And I think that's a core part that underpins the work that we are here trying to accomplish.
Thanks, Allison. You know, the accountability and so forth, I think it's a bigger question than just what we're dealing with around affordable housing. And we're at a time in our country, and I may be preaching to the crowd, but the crowd is supposed to spread the message to, you know, everyday other people who may not hear it as often. And you know, we're living in very difficult times, and truly we're at a moment that every single person, whether you are a person of color, whether you're white, whether you're Jewish, whatever, are going to be impacted with policies in our nation that will be pushed down to us from the president who is who's our president right now in the United States. And I just don't see how we can ignore that. We cannot ignore it. We cannot let ourselves get distracted. We've got to figure out what can we do to turn this around so that we will have affordable housing, we will have food, we will have education, we will have health care for our peoples, for all of our peoples. And I just say, please, November, you got to get out and vote, and you've got to encourage other people. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a very large question, and I appreciate all of you engaging with it. I love the reframe to crosswalking. That brings a complexity into the answers, and also the emphasis on, you know, what does accountability mean and who are we asking that to, and having a government that works for the people, by the people, what that means. Thank you. Now, as we talk about solutions and bridging that gap, crosswalking through the gap, I want to talk about best practices and what should be scaled. So we talk a lot about the nature of the issue and how massive it is, particularly here in Seattle and Washington State, where we're looking at such a wealth and income disparity, and we can see very visibly what it looks like for our communities and who is facing the effects of these systems. So based on your experience, what are the practices or models that we should be advocating for? and investing in to better support single adults and families. So I'd like to start with you. You talked a bit about having community-based, culturally appropriate services at Roberta Maestas, and what does that look like? What should we scale? What works right now?
Okay, well, again, I'm going to talk about it from, the affordable housing perspective and how do more community-based organizations develop housing, develop assets, and so forth in our communities. And sometimes we need to partner. We need to partner with other entities who have been doing, housing development for a long time. And affordable housing development is not easy. It's complicated. Issues come up, and you need to have somebody by your side, if you will, who knows how to handle those situations when they come up. And El Centro de la Raza uses development consultants, and we could not do our work without them because they know the work, and we, the reality as community-based organizations, are beginning to develop our capacity. And there's a lot to learn. And so I urge, nonprofit organizations of color and others to see how you can partner with some of those bigger developers. If I want to give an example of, and we've done a number of partnerships with a market rate developer and a larger nonprofit. And El Centro de la Raza with Mercy Housing won the Mount Baker project. And that's to build about 431 units of housing with retail space, other commercial space, beautiful art that will be on the building. The University of Washington is going to have a school of early learning to develop teachers for child development centers. So a great project. It's a big one. Mercy Housing could not have got this project without us. If we would have gone alone at that, we would not have gotten that project. So when you come together with, and it's, the bottom line, it's a part of coalition building, but with a specific partner. And I believe truly that that is the model to have more communities of color developing affordable housing. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Allison, you want to add to that?
Sure. It is really true that when you go to Roberto Maestas Plaza, you see faces on the buildings, and you see people in the plaza. And in some respects, the thing that I think about that we don't often speak about scaling up is understanding that holistic nature of what it means to build the society that we want to live in. Most assuredly, we need to scale up the creation of affordable homes. There are at least 200,000 affordable homes that we need in our region in the next decade or so. And most of them need to be for people who are earning much less than 50% of our area median income. So scaling up how we respond to the needs of people, including those who are living on very limited or no income, is the obvious answer. But I thought maybe we could just take a little time to think about some of the lessons that we, I hope, are learning in this time when, as Estela said, we have a federal government that is, in fact, attacking our communities, attacking the vision of being in community with each other, and indeed attacking the fundamental elements of a democracy. But when we look at what has happened in places like Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Chicago, we have seen absolutely extraordinary examples of very neighborhood-based community members stepping up, stepping out of their comfort zones and getting to know each other. And by the way, not just now, but since the pandemic and since the George Floyd demonstrations, which is a fascinating element of what folks in Minneapolis have shared. So that kind of getting to know your neighbors, because you need your neighbors to have your back, and you need to know that they have yours, is an incredibly important piece of what it takes, because that is the community building that allows us to shift to an experience in which communities welcome more neighbors, as opposed to saying, well, yes, it would be a good idea to have more housing that's subsidized for low-income families with kids, but this isn't the right place. Or maybe they could be further away from the light rail station, because the light rail station should be where the really fancy apartments are. You know, we need actually to have that personal connection at the hyperlocal level, as well as the policies in our cities, counties, and states that say we are going to invest in having more people be neighbors to each other, because that is actually truly what it takes for us to reclaim our democracy. We are in a state of crisis, and the crisis isn't only because of who is currently in the Oval Office, although that is a huge part of it. The crisis is also that an awful lot of people, myself included, don't actually know all of our neighbors, don't necessarily get involved in what happens to create the comprehensive plans in our communities. But I think there's also an incredible opportunity right now for that to shift. And I think we can see some of the elements of that right now.
Yes, I agree, and I think the times are dictating themselves to us that is how we need to organize ourselves. So we do believe Impact Network is a community power building model, and it is what is needing to be scaled. We see it as a best practice. When we talk about partnerships, that is an element of an impact network. The partners organizing around a shared priority. And that's really critical, that it's really clear what that priority is, and that as you enter into the partnerships, as you grow, this impact network winds up having more impact. So imagine this in terms of a best practice, a one-stop shop that a family or a person can go to if they're interested in home ownership, that will determine their particular situation and walk with them along the path all the way through to that ultimate goal. That's one of the best practices that we're talking about. And we do know that there's limitations to centralization, but for someone to just have a phone number or a QR code to call, and someone pick up that phone when they call, and they share that their interest is in housing or home ownership, and that person is able to get them connected to the resources all along the way and able to walk them through that particular process. That's one of the things that we are looking at as a best practice. The other is looking at suitability and readiness. We do want to make sure that folks who are pursuing these opportunities are suitable for them. And so, for instance, someone may be coming just out of homelessness and wanting an affordable housing. They may need to, they're more suitable to that earlier starter space as opposed to going straight to home ownership. But when they are suitable, we want to make sure that they are ready. And that's what this idea of a portal can provide, a hub, so to speak, for everyone to be able to call in who has these aspirations to get that kind of support.
Thank you so much. Sort of full circle with our discussion, rounding it back to the partnership, collective power building, and ecosystem-based solutions to scale for best practices. I want to end the discussion with a call to action, so engaging folks in the room and in the chat. We've mentioned a lot of different policies by name, and for those who are not as familiar, the Seattle Comprehensive Plan, the Covenant Homeownership Act at the state level, wanting to implement it more locally, of course, HB 2266, the Better Serve Our Neighbors, most recently in legislative session. What are live, concrete ways that folks can support housing justice efforts right now through advocacy, partnerships, or community action at the local level?
Okay.
Anyone can take that one.
One is that the state legislature and the governor came up with a way on how to get more money into our system, not just for affordable housing, but for education, for healthcare. And it was a tough one, but they did it. The millionaire tax. That is a very concrete thing that will help us build affordable housing and to do many things. So I ask, when you pass this message on to others who are listening today, don't get confused about it, because right now it's being challenged legally, and that is a very concrete way to get money. We increase our real estate taxes year after year, and you can only go so far. I mean, come on. And so we have a lot of wealthy people in Seattle, and I'm sure spread out around the state. And what I understand, and I hope I'm not giving wrong information, that the millionaire tax is whatever you make after $1 million is what gets taxed.
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying don't get confused about that, and tell people the truth about it. And that we've got to be conscious again, and I said it earlier, the November elections are incredibly important to make sure that the right people are in office so that they can figure out ways to build stronger communities, and what Dr. King said, to build our beloved community.
Thank you.
Well, Estella, thank you. Both of those are absolutely on my list as well, and it's worth noting that we at the Coalition on Homelessness strongly supported the passage of the millionaire's tax, and we knew that it would probably be 4 years of litigation before anybody in our community sees a penny from it. So most likely those of us who are voters will be needing to defend that tax at the ballot box. So it's great to spread good information about that. I will say the Coalition on Homelessness does advocacy all the time, and we warmly welcome and invite people to join us. Part of what we consider our mission is to help break down what might be hard to understand and to make it easy for people to take action. If you're not entirely sure who your city council member is, or whether or not Pramila Jayapal is your member of Congress, she might be, or your state lawmaker, not anymore, we will help you. So if you want to, you can go to homelessinfo.org. You can sign up for our email list. We do send action alerts when your voice is needed, and we try to make it really easy for you to speak to your elected officials, but also to share your personal reason for caring about these issues. We also help people register to vote and use and know their voting rights. And we train nonpartisan volunteers to help us do that. Not coincidentally, there is a massive attempt to suppress voters, especially voters of color, and especially women in this country right now. So it is very important for everyone to understand their voting rights, to check their registration, and to help other people who are eligible to vote to be registered and to vote, and to understand the issues. And I guess there are two other quick things I'll mention. We also help kids experiencing homelessness and their families be ready for school. And we, through Project Cool for Back to School, we invite donations and volunteers to put their hands to work to fill backpacks with school supplies and culturally appropriate and age-appropriate books and dental kits for about 1,800 kids in every zip code in King County. And the last thing I will say is there's an amazing national coalition called the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition. They are an outstanding organization made up of many other coalitions. It is a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition that is keeping its eye on the federal issues and the threats, for example, to families of color that are being perpetuated by this regime, particularly those who receive any kind of public benefits, and particularly people who are in any of the public housing across this country. So we sign on to pretty much every call to action for them, and they also do a great job of educating people, and I would encourage folks to check out their website too.
Thank you.
Yeah, just real quick, I pick up on that last point. Keep your eye on this. I'm sure you joined this event not out of passivity, and I'm sure life circumstances always impact our ability to stay focused, but keep your eyes on this. And also join coalitions. This impact network that we have with the Black Home Initiative, by the way, the blackhomeinitiative.org will help you get introduced to it. We have 125 members. We've been organizing for 3 or 4 years and have 125 members. We know there's more people out there than that that need to become partners, that need to be connected to movements like this. Allison mentioned coalition. How could you not be inspired by the charge offered to you by Estella? So keep your eyes on it. Join coalitions. There are folks on the supply side, in our kind of geeky language, we say, folks who can produce it, tap in that way. There's the demand side, folks who want it, tap in that way. And then there's enabling the environment, which is essentially our political system, tap in that way. So there are a lot of ways to tap in, but keep your eyes on this, please.
Thank you. We have one more comment.
I just have one more comment to make. In Congress right now, there is a bill that's called Save America Act, and it is a voter suppression bill. But let's say the ordinary individual who's not keeping up with what's going on, and they go to the ballot and they see Save America. Of course I want to save America. So they're going to check whatever there. But the voter suppression is against women, people of color, making it difficult, that you might need to have your passport, you might have to have your birth certificate. And we're doing an educational, a webinar on, I think it's on March the 7th, a Friday, that is going to explain that bill. And it's going to be done with our Congressperson Adam Smith. Please go to our website if you are interested in that so that you can get the registration information. And it's going to be a Zoom meeting. So make it easy for people to listen and see what Save America really means.
Thank you so much. We encourage everyone here and online to learn more about all of the efforts that our esteemed panelists have discussed, and please join me in thanking them for such a meaningful discussion.
Thank you for such a powerful and meaningful conversation today. Hello, I'm Douglas Jackson, and I'm co-chair of the People of Color Executive Council and a former YWCA board member. I hope that today leaves you informed, inspired, and ready to take action. This work is ongoing, and it requires all of us. Until Justice Just is part of a national YWCA campaign to confront systemic racism and build stronger communities. The People of Color Executive Council has proudly led this effort for over a decade, grounded in the belief that solutions come from the communities most impacted. If you'd like to get involved, and I think we've heard lots of ways to get involved today, we'd like you to come and join and be a part of any of our panelists, but also come and think about the People of Color Executive Council. You can find information about us on a chat and a way to contact us. So again, thank you for being here, thank you for your commitment, and for your continuing work beyond this, of what we're doing today. Also, please consider marking your calendars, Because in the February, in 2026, our YWCA Inspire Luncheon will be held on Thursday, September 24th at the West in Seattle, featuring keynote speaker Layla Ali, undefeated boxing champion, entrepreneur, and wellness advocate. This event will be offered both in person and via live stream, with registration opening in June. Thank you once again for being here today. You'll find all the resources mentioned linked in the chat and available at the YWCA website, along with a recording of this program. On behalf of the YWCA Seattle, Kings, Snohomish, and the People of Color Executive Council, thank you. We hope to see you here next year.